Welcome to Vernacular Verbose, the Jethro Tull fan podcast. Today's an exciting day for us. I'm excited, at least. I think we're both excited. We're doing 1975's Minstrel in the Gallery track-by-track album review and analysis. So this one, to me, this is a really interesting album to talk about. I know that I say that for kind of every episode we do, but I really believe it for this one. This is kind of a little bit of an under-the-radar album, at least when it comes to kind of the mainstream audience and the mainstream press, I feel like. What do you think, Eugene?
Yeah, it sort of surprises me because it is such a phenomenal work. And because when I was getting into Tull myself and recording all these cassettes that I am always talking about, it was one of the albums that I got, one of the first ones that I got and listened to. And I think probably because it's maybe on the surface not as flashy as some of the other works.
I guess I should clarify when I say under the radar. I think Tull fans are very familiar with the album. I don't mean to say that Tull fans aren't aware of it or anything. But it always feels to me that there's been a big gap between how a lot of Tull fans perceive this album and how I guess a lot of the more mainstream press or music audience did. Just in the sense that this album didn't have a huge impact, I think. Whereas in the Tull fan community, I think it had a very big impact. And it's still, not for everybody, but for most Tull fans, I think this is a pretty highly ranked and acclaimed album. And that's one that I would agree with as well.
Well, with a band like Tull, I don't think you can expect every album to have the same kind of impact.
Yeah.
There will be a few outliers that people outside the usual fan community will notice, like Aqualung or maybe Songs from the Wood. But in general, when there's a band with a lot of output who has a very kind of specific style and approach to music, it will fall out of notice of the general press because that's a band who do their thing.
Yeah.
And Minstrel, even being the phenomenal work that it is, I think is just Jethro Tull doing their thing for the journalists.
I think there's a couple unique things that we can say about it in terms of sort of tone and also musicality. Mm-hmm. Whereas I would identify this as quite a serious and sober Tull album, and it's especially striking coming after War Child, which I think was not particularly serious or sober. It was much more sort of like balls to the wall kind of burlesque, whereas Minstrel in the Gallery it reels things back a lot, and it's much more of, it's very somber and sort of all of the things that it seeks to present and the way that it handles things.
It is. I call it one of Jethro Tull's darker albums, and I always mention that I like Tull's darker works, and Minstrel is one of them.
Yeah, and musically, I've seen a lot of people write about this album that it's one of the most hard rock Tull albums, and I think there's something to be said for that.
It's very guitar-oriented.
Yeah.
Compared to the previous two albums at least, which were, even three albums, even counting Thick as a Brick, which were very keyboard-heavy, this one is very guitar-heavy, Martin-heavy. Mm-hmm.
And it's actually kind of funny because at the same time, it's going back to kind of the blend of electric and acoustic songs, which is also sort of the kind of thing that we saw on Aqualung and even kind of Benefit. Whereas, there's significant parts of the album that are just acoustic singer-songwriter songs with acoustic guitar and strings. But at the same time, you have like some of the biggest hard rock tracks that the band ever did right next to them. So I think when it comes to the recording of this album, one of the interesting things to note about it is that it was actually recorded in Monaco. It was one of the few pieces of Tull material recorded outside the UK. This album and the next album, Too Old to Rock and Roll, were both recorded in Monaco for tax exile purposes, which was something the band had been trying to do for a while with the Chateau sessions and that kind of thing.
Yeah, and I don't think the tax exemption were successful in any way with this album in particular, I think.
Yeah, I remember hearing about that like in the end it didn't make a difference or something. There's a lot of really great kind of anecdotes from the Monaco part of the album that are written in the Stephen Wilson booklet. And there's this one particular quote from Ian that I wanted to read, which I thought was so funny, where he said that it made me sick getting up in the morning and watching all these people lying on the beach with their amazing vanity. Most of them are really ugly people, physically grotesque. The women are unattractive and the men are obscene, and they do nothing. And I get very aggressive in that sort of situation because I've got a lot of things to do. And I thought that was a gold quote about Monaco from Ian Anderson.
Yeah, that's true. The stories in the booklet, there's a couple of perspectives there, and in particular, Martin, I think, says that it felt sort of weird being away from the UK for, did they spend a year there or something?
Mm-hmm.
And some of them had their families with them, some of them didn't, and they had to make it work and have fun in this kind of odd working exile situation.
Yeah. One of the interesting things about the Manko side of the project that's written about in the book is that Ian says that he thought that the band were going through a very tense period. In other words, that they weren't really happy with each other and they were fighting a lot. But in the same interview in the booklet, Martin actually contests that, where he says that, no, it's just Ian was taking it very, very seriously. That's kind of all it was, and that no one else in the band was unhappy or anything like that. I thought that was interesting.
Yeah, and that a lot of the games that they were playing were actually initiated by Ian.
Yeah.
So him being hard on the band for wanting to have fun was also kind of unfair.
Mm-hmm.
Like they wrecked some very expensive badminton rackets, I think.
Yeah, I remember that. And the title, Minstrel in the Gallery, actually came from a balcony that was in the recording space they were in, which sort of reminded them of a minstrel's gallery, and I thought that was always kind of interesting.
Yeah, but they ended up not having that on the album cover.
Yeah, it's on the back cover. What do you think about the album cover?
Oh, it's one of probably my least favorite Tull covers, because it kind of feels low effort. It's based on an old painting, and it's really, I kind of find it hard to concentrate on it. Every time I try to look at a detail, my eyes just slip from the details. I can't really concentrate on any single part of that image, and it doesn't work like that with the original painting. The original painting kind of pops more. It's more colorful and more characterful. Well, this one it's like a dream of that painting. You know how in a dream you can't concentrate on a specific detail, right? When you try to look at something, it changes. So that's what the cover feels like. I just came up with this comparison, and maybe that is what makes it cool. But still, I don't know. It's a little low effort, a little bland. I think Ian doesn't like it very much too.
It's actually one of my favorites.
Really?
Of the whole discography, yeah. The thing I like about it, I think number one, it fits the serious image of the album somewhat, and I think especially with the typeface, which the typeface is very hard to read, but I actually don't mind that. How it's sort of the typeface at the top with the album title and the artist. I think the thing I like about it is that it feels like a good representation of what Jethro Tull is to me, in the sense that it's taking something medieval, in which this case is actually an authentic, well, not a medieval painting. It's an authentic 19th century painting, which I didn't even know until I read the Stephen Wilson book, so that's pretty cool. But it's an authentic representation of a medieval scene, but at the same time, there's sort of absurdities within it and sort of humorous things in it. Like you have the kid who's riding around on like the guy in the alligator costume and that kind of thing. So it's one of those things where when you look close at it, it's this sort of authentically medieval scene, but it has these absurdities in it. And to me, that's like a good representation of sort of what Jethro Tull is and the Tull sound to me. I think what you were saying about the details being too hard to concentrate on, I kind of wonder if part of that is just because of how they made it brown, whereas the original painting wasn't brown.
Made it brown and sort of high contrast.
Yeah.
So everything is a little bit too bright, or either too bright or too dark.
At the same time, I kind of get that, because I think if you didn't have the brown, I agree that it would pop a lot more and it would be a much more appealing cover art to the eye. But at the same time, I actually kind of like it, just in the sense that when you look at it, I think your eye immediately recognizes that, oh, this is a very old thing that I'm looking at. And I think that's a part of sort of the medieval feel of it, I guess.
It's cool that you like it, because I always like when we find these things completely disagree about.
I remember Ian saying he didn't like it either in one of the interviews he did. And it's worth noting that it's a little bit altered from the original painting, just in that on the original painting, the painting is called 12th Night Revels in the Great Hall, Haddon Hall, Derbyshire, by Joseph Nash, British artist. And in the original painting, in the Minstrel's Gallery, there's sort of a crowd of different minstrels, whereas on the album cover, they altered it so that it's 5 to represent the 5 people in the band.
Yeah. Unlike many other Tull-related paintings on covers and back covers and such, I think none of the musicians in this cover actually represent is actually similar. I think none of the musicians on this cover actually looks like anyone from Jethro Tull.
Yeah, I agree. I thought the same thing. And I think it was hard because it was hard for them to represent a keyboard player probably in the Minstrels, which I don't remember what they did with him. Maybe they gave him a lute or something.
Yeah, they're all playing either. There's like 2 lute players, and 2 woodwind players, and a person with cymbals.
Mm-hmm. So when it comes to the member lineup for the band, this is still the Jeffrey lineup, but notably this was the last album that Jeffrey Hammond played on. So there was Ian Anderson, vocals, flute, acoustic guitar, Martin Barr on electric guitar, Jeffrey Hammond on bass, Barry Barlow on drums, and John Evans on keyboards. So I think there's a lot that can be said about the departure of Jeffrey Hammond, and in a lot of the interviews and things that I've seen with other members of the band beyond Ian, they sort of identified that moment as a very big turning point in the band, where relations within the band sort of changed after that period. Because Jeffrey was a very good friend of Ian's, and I think there was a lot of suggestion that Ian was kind of hurt by the way that Jeffrey's departure happened, because it was very sudden and shocking and nobody really saw it coming. And that sort of from that day on, I remember specifically Barry Barlow has said in a lot of interviews that he felt from that point onwards, after Jeffrey had left, that it changed from being sort of a friendly camaraderie in the band to being more of a business relationship, and that a lot of the relationships kind of suffered as a result of that.
I kind of think it's one story that people tell, but there's a completely different story, because they knew that Jeffrey would play with Jethro Tull for 5 years. That's what he said. That is what he intended to do, and that is what he did. So saying that it came out of nowhere is kind of facetious.
Yeah, I've heard that also.
I know it did seem sudden to them, because they probably were hoping that he would stay. But it was his initial plan to play with a band for a certain time and not beyond that.
I remember reading that story somewhere as well, that he had mentioned in advance that he only wanted to do it for a certain period of time. But I remember there's a Jeffrey interview somewhere, and there's not a lot of interviews with Jeffrey, but I remember reading one somewhere where he mentioned that he regretted the way that he handled leaving, because he said that it kind of was blurted out in the middle of a business meeting, like sort of in an intense way, and that was kind of part of the shock of how it happened, I think.
Probably, but also I've read the booklets for Heavy Horses and Stormwatch even, and in both of these people say that they were still very good friends at that point. Especially Heavy Horses was a happy time for the band, and they were just I think it's Dee who says that they were just a bunch of people who loved each other to bits.
Yeah, I remember in Song from the Wood it's saying that as well.
So it just I think seemed a low point, which bands have.
Yeah.
But maybe not a turning point. Although it's interesting how, departure of bass players in various manners signifies various turning points in Jethro Tull history. Yeah.
And it was really, the end of Jeffrey Hammond as an artist, because apparently the urban legend is he burned his stage clothes and all that kind of thing after the last show or something like that.
I think the urban legend is that they burned his clothes.
Oh, they did. But, I didn't know that.
Yeah, but I think, and he's not sure of that because he didn't think they would catch fire.
No, that's funny. This is a little off topic, but there's very few pro-shot footage of the Hammond lineup, the Jeffrey Hammond band. So pro-shot footage of Tull in the 70s is fairly rare to begin with, but sort of the Hammond period from the 71 to 75, there's almost no sort of good quality video out there. The only one that I can think of is on the Minstrel in the Gallery tour. There's that one song that was pro-shot, and that's the only footage that exists to my knowledge of that lineup.
Yeah, it's a shame they didn't do Beat Club, who famously taped all of their concerts.
So track 1, Minstrel in the Gallery.
The minstrel in the gallery looked down upon the smiling faces. He met the gazes obsessed.
So the first thing I'm going to ask is what you think about the spoken word at the very beginning.
Well, it's setting a scene, isn't it? And this is kind of the frame that they create for this album. Concept or no concept, but they want us to be transported into a specific setting. And it's cool that they aren't doing it in a completely straight and serious way, because with Ian muttering something in your ear, it's kind of, so they are setting a scene with a chord and musicians performing to a few listeners, but they're also lampshading it a little by showing us the musician's point of view and the musician's attitude towards what is going to be happening, or that they are kind of not massively into it, and maybe they are from another time or something, because what we're hearing from Ian in one of the ears, it doesn't sound like a historical character. While I think D. Palmer is who's announcing, sort of tries to sound like a historical character.
Oh, it's interesting, because I was going to ask if you knew who that first voice was, because I wasn't sure who it was, but it does sound like Palmer. So, so I like how they kind of carry forward that whole theme with kind of the foot stomping during the acoustic part, which is kind of like playing into that idea of them being minstrels playing this in a great hall or something.
Is that foot stomping? Because I wanted to ask. It's kind of a drumming, but not drumming.
That's what it always sounded like to me.
And it's interesting how these stomps get faster every time.
Yeah, they're quite. So the rhythm is quite odd on them.
They're not entirely musical. They're more like a bit of sound design.
But I think it's nice how they kind of carry forward the whole minstrel idea with that, that little bit. There's some crazy time signatures, and I don't know what they are, but you can just tell from listening to it. There's a lot of crazy stuff going on.
Yeah, especially on Martin's solo.
Yeah, and I wanted to ask about that, because I love this song. I think it's a great song. I don't want anyone to think I'm trashing it, but it kind of bothers me the way that they did the transition between the acoustic and the electric. Not necessarily like the bridge in the middle. I love that middle sort of solo part. I think that's actually one of the best instrumental pieces the band have ever done. But specifically, it bothers me how I think vocally the electric part and the acoustic part is just kind of the same thing again. That kind of bothers me. And it's almost to the point where I like both. I like this track generally, but I almost kind of wish that if it was up to me, I might just cut the acoustic part, or at least leave it as like an extended bonus track version, because it kind of bothers me how it's just the same lyrics again.
I in my notes I wrote pretty much the same thing, but in a slightly different way, because I think that the way the lyrics are written, they work better with the acoustic part, in my opinion. Yeah. But it does bother me that we're just repeating practically the same lyrics in the heavy part of the song. There's a chorus added there, which is missing from the acoustic part, but I end up feeling and wishing that they would have written just more lyrics for it. Yeah, I agree. Because in the acoustic part, there's some wonderful vocal harmonies that come together in a brilliant way on the line. He called the band down to the stage and he looked, is where they just come together in a very beautiful interval.
Yeah, I totally agree. There's a lot of double bass going on the drums. Like, this is probably one of the biggest double bass Tull songs.
Yeah, I don't think I tend to notice double bass as much as you, because, well, for the obvious reason that you're a drummer. But yeah, well, this kind of double bass is kind of Barry's style.
Yeah. I think specifically in the past, Barry used double bass, like on Passion Play and War Child, he used them mostly on fills. But on this song, the central beat of the electric part of the song is very, very dependent on the double bass rhythm, which is quite interesting. It's pretty difficult to play that drum beat with a single pedal, like, accurately.
I think he just started doing it more,
Yeah.
He just, as the time went, he started getting more and more into double bass playing and relying on that.
Yeah.
I like in the acoustic part, there's a very interesting reverb thing going on the phrase on the parts they never mention. and until one-line jokers, there's a very kind of visual sort of reverb, like we're listening to the band from a different part of the building, but it's also superimposed on the clean sound to remain musical and not to give us an impression of a soundtrack. But the space is not the same, and it adds to the kind of visual element, what we're supposed to be imagining.
Yeah, the lyrics themselves are quite interesting to me. I don't know if there's a lot to really read out of them meaning-wise, but they strike me as very verbose, I guess. Like there's a lot of big vocabulary in them. That probably sounds simple, but it's always struck me how it almost seems like he's trying on purpose to make the lyrics as sort of complex sounding as possible. Like the whole lines like he titillated men of action and that kind of thing. Like that's never a thing I would have thought to put in.
Yeah, they are a little bit obtuse, you know, in a good way. It's one of Ian's lyrical writing styles of the time, you know, using 12 words where 2 would suffice.
Right. And one final thing I don't like that much about it is the very end. I don't really like the vocal riffing kind of going out into the fade out, if you know what I mean. Where he's just kind of like crooning over the end of it, which I'm not a huge fan of. But it probably sounds like I'm trashing this song, but I'm really not. I think this is a great song. It's just the way they tied the two pieces together is kind of clunky to me and doesn't sit that well.
Yeah, I agree. It is kind of stuck in my mind for the past week as I've been listening to this album and thinking about it. But I agree that on this album they've explored the approach to starting with a soft acoustic part or just a soft part and then making it heavier. And they did it in various ways in different songs. And this is one of the approaches. And it's kind of interesting that this song and Cold Wind and Black Satin Dancer were recorded on the same day.
Yeah.
So I don't know which one of these songs was written the first, but it kind of feels like Minstrel in the Gallery, this specific song, is like the first attempt at making that contrasting composition.
Yeah, that could be. They recorded this album in a little under 3 weeks, I think, which, I mean, when you're a full-time band recording, 8-9 hours a day, I guess, that can happen if you have it written in advance. But that's a very fast amount of time to complete an album. So I always thought that was very interesting.
Well, I think they recorded Thick as a Brick faster than that. So.
Oh, really? That's really impressive to me.
Yeah, I think it was kind of one of the points that they brought up in interviews, that they did it within a week or something. Track 2, Cold Wind to Valhalla.
Join with us, please, Valkyrie maidens cry above the cold wind to Valhalla.
This is one I really want to talk about a lot, and specifically about the lyrics. But before we go there, what do you think about the rhythmic structure of it? Because it's basically in 4/4, but it's interspersed by bars of 5/8 that sort of either break up the monotony or were just inserted there for the hell of it. What do you think of that?
One of the things, I mean, the drums on this track are great. I mean, I think this track in general is great, but the drums sound great on it, and I think. So we just recently did that cover of Saturation, which maybe some of our listeners have seen. And the drums on this song actually remind me a bit of the drum part on Saturation, just in the sense that there's parts where, I think it's during the time signature changes that you're talking about, where Barry sort of goes to the toms to accentuate that da-da-da-da-da. And that reminded me a lot of what he does on Saturation, where he very suddenly switches time signatures and goes to the toms to accentuate.
There's a great YouTube video with the sheet music of the drum parts of the song.
I've never seen that. Wow.
In this song, I think it's structured in a similar way to the previous one. It's got an acoustic half and it's got an electric half. It starts soft and then it slams down. But to me, I feel the execution on this one is so much better. And the progressive layering is done in kind of a more immersive way, because we start to get the strings that hint that things are about to change. And the string arrangement is absolutely wild.
Yeah,
it's complex and dramatic, and at first we're getting the guitar kind of wails and cries, and then the strings I don't know. Are they imitating dog barks? Because it feels to me like they do.
Never thought of that. That could be. I'd have to go back and listen. But
yeah, it's like 222 the timestamp on that. The strings really sound like an imitation of a dog barking.
I totally agree with you, though, that this track is so much more cohesive than the one that came before it. And I think the way the band comes in is really great, and it hits really hard. And I love the guitar shrieking that you mentioned, where I think that fits in very well with sort of the theme of this, of being, you know, I guess, spiritual Vikings or whatever it is, riding across the sky and that kind of thing.
This whole arrangement is kind of chaotic, but it's very organized chaos.
Yeah, the drums especially. There's the part, the "Ride with Us, Please," Valkyrie Maiden's Cry. That part's very chaotic sounding, where the drums are sort of freeform.
Another thing I noticed, I think I just noticed it recently, on the song timestamp 324, there's a repeating note on the organ that just goes. It kind of reminds me of Requiem on "Close to the Edge" by Yes. It's got a very kind of a similar thing going on there. So, the lyrics. To me, the lyrics are a huge part of this song, and one of the things that I find very interesting is these sort of word piles, pieces of word salad that this song in particular is full of, like the crack wind clatter flash rain bite. What kind of a phrase is that? I've been talking to my wife about this song. We both love this song a lot, and we've kind of tried to parse these lyrics and make sense of them. And I'm not proud of it, but I didn't get how we should actually look at these little pieces of word salad in a way to make sense of them. And I found the answer on one of the Tull boards. It's been posted by the user Mortheron. And these phrases are kennings, which makes a lot of sense. A kenning is a Norse poetic device in like Icelandic and other Norse poetry. And it's a figure of speech, in the as Wikipedia tells us, in the type of circumlocution. So it is naming an object in an oblique manner by not referring to it directly. The kind of magical thinking that you can't name an object directly by name. And some examples of kennings in like classical northern poetry would be like saying that death is sleep of the sword, or fire is bane of wood, and things like that. So instead of fire, you would say bane of wood. Instead of gold, you would say serpent's lair, because in northern mythology, gold is guarded by dragons. So I think that with these lyrics centered very heavily around the myth of Valhalla, Ian is specifically constructing these very complicated kennings to refer to images that he's imagining and not necessarily wants us to immediately parse, if that makes sense. So, like crack wind clatter flash rain bite, I think in my mind stands just for a whip. But he's not saying that we're hearing the sound of a whip. He's saying that phrase instead. And I'm not sure about the next phrase, which is roughshod winging sky blue flight. What do you think of that? Is it just the image of them riding to Valhalla put into this like more complicated phrase, or is it something different?
Yeah, it makes me think of taking flight against the sky, which that sounds like what it is to me.
Well, yeah, but I feel weird interpreting it like that because there's the word sky, because normally in a kenning you wouldn't have you wouldn't call something that direct, but maybe I shouldn't read a lot into that. I have a list of these phrases like in front of me because I want to talk about them one by one. the one that baffles me probably the most is frozen flaking fish raw nerve in a cup of silver liquid fire, because that's weird. According to the lyrics, it is something that the night angels, i.e. Valkyries, serve in Valhalla. And we know from the Valhalla myths that in Valhalla people dine on the flesh of a boar who's slaughtered every day and revived every evening, and drink mead from the teats of a heavenly goat. So nothing to do with fish, nothing to do with silver liquid fire. I find it kind of difficult to interpret that. Do you have thoughts about this?
Just at first glance, it just seems to me to be a description of food and drink in Valhalla. That's all that I could really get out of it.
Just the kind of dreamlike, surreal image.
Yeah, like cup of silver liquid fire.
Mm-hmm. So nothing concrete behind it, right?
Not to me, but who knows?
Mm-hmm. Because I know how to interpret the next phrase very well, because it's kind of the next phrase is very clear to me. Moonjet, brave beam, split ceiling, swerve. This is lightning. This is very clearly moonjet. So a flash the color of the moon, a beam the color of a moon that splits the sky in half in a swerving kind of motion and lights Valhalla, as per the next line. So this canning, I think I can answer, I can unriddle. But next we have the size of Thor's trusty handmaidens, which could be clouds or rolls of thunder, but the heroes rest upon the rolls of thunder. It kind of sounds strange. What do you think?
Yeah, so I would think clouds because of the whole heroes rest upon thing.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, that's what I would get out of it.
Okay, so we can write down clouds. And you mentioned to me in conversation before that you know, at least you have a theory of the last one in the song, which is sword snap, fright, white, pale, goodbyes. I'm completely baffled by this. I have no idea.
It made me think of skeletons, and I think specifically destroying skeletons, so, swinging at skeletons with a sword. So sword snap, fright, white, pale, goodbyes being the destruction of the skeletons.
The dead heroes battling against each other, which they famously do.
Either each other or some other kind of, I don't know, undead force or something.
I don't think there are undead forces in Valhalla, because that's kind of the afterlife, and this is battling is what they do for fun.
Yeah.
They get up in the morning and have a hearty little battle. So yeah, that it could be that. It could be that. Yeah, I'm glad we at least have a theory to go with it now.
I didn't know anything about the kennings until you mentioned them to me, but I thought it was interesting because when you look at the lyrics, that's very clearly what he's trying to do. That it's very clearly sort of a nod to that kind of writing style.
Yeah, exactly. And I don't know how I didn't notice that until I read that on the Tull board, but I'm very grateful to the user Mortheron, or I think he's also called the Dark Elf on a different forum, because he posted his explanation multiple times.
This was one of the things that I loved so much about Tull as a kid growing up, because when I was a kid, I guess just to reveal a little bit about how lame I was, I was very into sort of the classic, like Tolkien-esque medieval fantasy and that kind of thing. And I know that, Valhalla isn't exactly, that kind of thing. I mean, it's a mythological type thing. But still, I mean, you just didn't see rock bands writing music about topics like that. But I felt like I could identify with it a lot because of them choosing to write Tull songs about
Yeah, well, you did
like
have Led Zeppelin and Uriah Heep writing music about that.
Yeah, that's true.
That period.
I was never a big Zeppelin fan, but you're right. One thing I wanted to ask about in this song, so the very beginning with sort of the vocal introduction, where he introduces it almost as if he's, doing the song live or something. I always thought that was interesting. And there's actually quite a lot of that on this album, where there's a lot of vocal intros, whether it's count-ins or whatever, for whatever reason.
Yeah, I think on the first side of the album, we are still in that performance kind of story.
That's yeah. I haven't
So
thought about that.
he's introducing the song to his listeners.
Mm-hmm.
I think it changes down the line, but here where he's still performing.
Yeah, that's interesting. There's also some kind of hand percussion in the first acoustic part.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, this small section on the second half of this song where everybody drops out except the guitar and then the drums come in, that's like one of my favorite moments on the whole album. I think the way they did that just rocks so hard.
Yeah, the drums come in this song in absolutely brilliantly. And the hand percussion, the kind of hand drums or something, I'm not sure what kind of drums these are. Maybe bongos, maybe tablas again, like Tull would have used on previous albums. You don't really notice them, but they support the acoustic part so well.
Yeah, I agree. Track 3, Black Satin Dancer.
Come let me play with you, black satin dancer. In all you give and give is the answer.
So this one has always struck me as one of the biggest hard rock Tull songs. And it's, you just mentioned Led Zeppelin, and that parts of it almost kind of get Zeppelin-y to me later on.
Kind of bluesy in a way, rhythmically.
I think the strings on this song are great. I think the strings are great on the whole album, but I think they're really good here.
Yeah, I think the instrumentation on this one is really brilliant in all aspects, like the glockenspiel.
Yeah,
that they use. I like how it begins the kind of gingerly bass walk down when the bass first repeats a note and then is very carefully but firmly starts getting softer.
Yeah.
This song again, it's exploring a similar musical idea as in the previous two songs. We're starting soft and we are going heavier, but this time it's very, very gradual.
Yeah, I agree. The thing that always intrigued me the most about the intro is the cymbal sound, and I assume that's just from mallets, but I was never really sure. But it sounds like mallets just swelling.
Yeah, that's a very interesting sound. I'm not sure it's achievable with mallets or with studio trickery.
Yeah.
I think, it does sound like cymbals played with mallets, but I think they are being brought in and out then on the recording by using faders. I may be mistaken.
It could be, because it doesn't. I agree that it doesn't sound exactly like what a normal mallet play would sound like.
Attack-wise, because when you're attacking, as it were, a cymbal with mallets, there is a period in the beginning where the cymbal is not ringing hard enough, and here we don't get that. So this is why I'm supposing that it's like a long cymbal swell that's been recorded with mallets, and then played with a fader on the mixing board just to give that shh.
Yeah, but either way, that sound has always stuck out to me, just because I guess just as a drummer, it's always been really interesting, that sound. The intro of this song is okay for me. I don't dislike it, but to me, it really gets going at sort of the middle part. You specifically mentioned the glockenspiel kind of right when that part starts is when this song really gets good for me.
Yeah, and it's funny with the glockenspiel because they do the middle part is kind of a chromatic bluesy riff. It's got that to it, but the glockenspiel makes that very elegant.
Yeah.
And when it goes away, it becomes heavier just by the virtue of not having the glockenspiel in there.
I love this. One of my favorite parts of the song and one of my favorite album moments is sort of the sped up part, if you know what I mean, where they progressively get faster and faster. I think that's great. And you have all the kind of the flute garbling going on, which I like a lot too there. Yeah,
is that like I've got a timestamp written down here. It's like 3:07. Like there's a quiet moment and the flute starts getting frantic. Right? This is one of my favorite parts here, and the flute there is very early kind of Jethro Tull sound.
Totally.
There's also a great part on the hi-hats on the line the old gold story of mercy. There's kind of a hi-hat line that creates a tension.
Is that sort of the sudden like hi-hat explosions? Yeah. I was going to mention those because that's something that Barry does a lot, not just on this album, but on all of Tull. But this is a really good example of that, where he does those sort of hi-hat stabs a lot. And that's like a really characteristic part of his playing. And that's something that has rubbed off on me a lot. I think as a drummer, I was very inspired by that kind of playing.
Yeah, and it's just in this part, it sticks out a lot because that's a very soft moment. And the hi-hat just goes to... Yeah.
And lots of choke cymbals also in the later heavy part. This part right after the sped up part, kind of when the sped up part reaches its climax, there's kind of a sudden shift to what sounds like a different track, sort of, where that da 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 when that part comes in.
Yeah, it's kind of similar to in the song Minstrel in the Gallery, how they attached the heavier part to the softer part, but here we've had quite a climb up to it. It's not that sudden.
And then the slow part at the end before it goes back into the quiet intro, that part's always been kind of funny to me because it's almost like the closest thing that Jethro Tull has ever gotten to like doom metal or something.
Yeah, it's very nicely heavy in a very pleasant way. Again, yeah, maybe a little Led Zeppelin-y because of the bluesy rhythm.
But yeah, I don't know if I'd say this is a favorite of mine necessarily, but I really love sort of the track from the middle onwards. I think it's a really big roller coaster, and there's some great parts in there. And I'm not super crazy about the intro and outro, but I can live with it. Just
because it's the kind of the same musical situation that we've already had with the previous two songs, or just this song alone?
Well, it's a little slow for me, I guess. Like maybe not slow tempo-wise, but just slow generally. And I don't know. Parts of it. It's funny because I feel like I'm trashing these songs a lot, but this is this is like a top 5 Tull album for me generally. I guess I'm just picking out the negative stuff to talk about, but I think the beginning is a little sappy to me. Do you think it's fair to say that?
Well, yeah, this is one of the kind of love songs that Tull have a very precious few of, but still, it's soft, but it's very interspersed by louder parts.
Yeah, with the "Your Fast River Flowing" thing. And that's another thing too, is lots of double bass tremors is the way I would put it, where double bass is used to a specific effect of sounding like lots of shaking and a big rumbling going on, which is kind of interesting during that quiet part.
Yeah, the kind of sound design wise. At the end also, in the quiet coda part, when the coda goes to the string swell, that last minute kind of lift, there's what seems to be a very low crunchy cluster on a Hammond organ at the start of the string chord. It's so fitting, but it's also such a strange usage of a Hammond organ in that context. Kind of, how did they come up with that?
Oh, you just found something, because that organ is not in the O2 remaster.
Oh, that is interesting.
Yeah, well, we just discovered something here. Yeah, I just listened, because I listened to the O2 remaster first, and I wasn't hearing it at all, and it's there in the Steve Wilson one.
That's cool.
Yeah, so that's why I couldn't. I mean, I listened to the Steve Wilson last night, but I just listened and was wondering what was going on.
Is it not there at all, or just completely in the background?
I didn't hear it at all on the O2 remaster, and I hear it clearly on the Steve Wilson.
Well, I think that was a brilliant decision if Steven found it and decided to leave it in, because it's just such a wonderful sound. Just gives that string swell a whole new color. Track 4, Requiem.
Well, I saw a bird today flying from a bush, and the wind blew it away.
I have a penchant for soft acoustic Tull songs, and this one is one of my favorites, always has been. It's kind of hard to find things to say about it. I like how Jeffrey plays double bass on this, which is a different kind of double bass to the double bass you've been referring to.
Yeah.
So string bass, and it fits the song so well.
Yeah, I feel the same way. I like this song a lot. I don't know if I'd say it's one of my favorite acoustic Tull songs, but I like it. I think it's nice. But I also, sadly, don't have a lot to say about it. I wish I had more to say about it. That's actually interesting. I didn't even know there was double bass on this song. I never heard that before, so I'm going to have to go back and listen. I always just thought it was acoustic guitar.
No, it actually has string bass.
So that explains it then, because on the back cover, the striped double bass is in the picture in the frame, and I always wondered why, because I had never heard it on the album, but now I know why.
Yeah, it is there, and he's credited with playing it too. What's interesting to me about this one, what I read in the in the Steven Wilson booklet, there's an early version of this song.
Yeah.
It's included as one of the bonus tracks. And the way Ian talks about it, he says that it was a much longer piece. What's funny is that this early version is exactly as long as the new version.
That's funny.
It's 3:43 to the second. But it does feel like a longer piece because the arrangement is more boring. And it's less together, it's less inspired. And yeah, they did well by removing the piano arrangement.
The only thing I have to comment on this song specifically is kind of lyrically. I know that one of the things that critics have written about a lot about this album is that it was sort of a divorce album because Ian had just been divorced to his first wife recently, and a lot of kind of how I grew up understanding this album was colored through that perception. But I saw in the Steve Wilson booklet that Ian actually disputes that. He says that that wasn't a relevant thing for the lyrics, and a lot of the lyrics aren't about that and that kind of thing. But even though he says that, I kind of wonder with a song like this, because this is a song that, well, I'm not saying it's about a divorce necessarily, but there's some parts of it that I wouldn't be surprised if they were kind of inspired by a man who had just gone through a divorce or that kind of thing. So specifically the lyrics about, seeing a bird, I saw a bird, I turned aside and walked away, that kind of thing. It kind of strikes me as a double euphemism for a bird being a girl, especially in Britain, how young women are referred to as birds and that kind of thing. So that's always kind of how I looked at this song lyrically, is that, I'm not saying it's about his divorce or anything, but I wouldn't be surprised if the kind of subject matter and word choice were inspired by kind of that kind of thing going on.
Or even subconsciously.
Yeah.
I know it's what Ian talks about a lot, that very few of his songs are autobiographical. But, he pieces them together from his experiences, because his experiences is all he has.
Yeah.
Right? And even if it's like inspired by literature or art. And yeah, in particular, the kind of a feeling of separation, processing the feeling of separation that happens in this song. I think it may well be inspired by maybe just the state he was in, the state of mind.
Yeah, exactly.
Like in the lyrics to Minstrel in the Gallery, it's kind of part of him being angry at the people he saw in Monaco.
Yeah. It's
the way he describes the public.
I never thought about that, but I think you're right.
Yeah, so it's just the pieces of experience that turn into something different in a song. So the song not being about the people he saw in Monaco on the beach, and Requiem not being about his divorce, but where it came from, all of these experiences exist.
I think part of what I'm trying to say is that a lot of the acoustic songs on this album, they feel much more personal than any acoustic Tull songs previously. And I don't know if that was the intention. I don't think he was sort of intending to go super singer-songwriter, that kind of thing, but it feels that way. They feel like much more personal singer-songwriter type songs than we've gotten in the past.
Well, maybe Cheap Day Return was pretty much personal.
Yeah, I agree with that. And then the only other thing I'd say on it is it took me a long time, like many years, before I realized that the Strand is an actual place in London. When he says, I turned and walked along the Strand, I never knew that was... Yeah. I thought that was... He just meant like, an actual strand. I didn't know that was a real place.
No, I think it was pretty obvious to me because I read the lyrics and Strand is capitalized. So I like how the song ends on an unresolved note.
Yeah, I like that.
It's like the kind of boom. In the end, it's a C, and at the second degree of B flat, where the entire song sits.
Yeah, it's a really bittersweet kind of sound, I think.
It kind of makes you expect it to continue, which is what an unresolved note would sound like. But I always kind of imagine a melody playing in my head afterwards.
It's kind of like the audible version... The audible representation of a question mark.
Exactly.
Track 5, 1 white duck, 0 to the power of 10 equals nothing at all.
Isn't it just too damn real? One white duck on your wall. One duck on your wall.
So this is, for me, maybe what Requiem was for you, in that this is like an all-time top acoustic Tull song for me. What about you?
Oh, that's cool. That's really cool. Well, two songs in one. So
yeah, and actually, so I have kind of a funny story about that. Where, for me as a kid growing up, it wasn't clear to me that the slash in the track title was sort of denoting between, you know, two songs. So because there's a math sort of equation in the title, I grew up reading this title as one white duck divided by 0 to the power of 10 equals nothing at all. And
that's funny, because as you're saying that, I'm kind of imagining that I did too, but
yeah.
I'm not sure if that's just me. My memory is being colored, but what you've just said. But yeah.
And I always thought that was a brilliant track title, and I still kind of prefer to see it that way as a formula.
Mm-hmm. That's kind of cool. Well, my experience with this song when I was a kid, a teen, was I didn't know what the white duck was referring to, and until very much later. So as Ian explains it, this is a kind of living room ornament of a typical lower middle class family home. You know, like the 3 china ducks on the wall. And I never knew that, and I thought that this one white duck on your wall was just some kind of surreal image, a very abstract, in a very abstract kind of way. What's a white duck on a wall? I had no idea. And this view is I still kind of like looking at the song like that. Like the white duck is something very, very abstract. But also the 3 china ducks, what they remind me of a very similar typical lower middle class Soviet ornament that you would see in people's homes, which was a row of little china elephants, coming from a very small elephant to an elephant like 3 times as large, maybe. I think should have been like 6 of them or 9 of them, not 3. It's a long row of little elephants. My great grandmother used to have them in a home in the countryside. I was never allowed to touch them because I would break them, obviously.
That's interesting how there's a sort of connection between 2 different cultures there with the same kind of object. Mm-hmm. I was the same as you, where I always grew up seeing the one white duck as just sort of a representation of some abstract, surreal thing, particularly with the line like, "Isn't it just too damn real? One white duck on your wall," that kind of thing. And I didn't really know what it was until I read Ian talk about it. And in fact, I guess I forgot that I read that because I still didn't really know what it was until you mentioned today. But if that interview was in the booklet, I'm sure I've read it before.
Yeah, it is in the booklet. Again, this one has progressive layering in the build, specifically the one white duck part, because you've got strings coming in, then the bass is coming in, and I absolutely love the chord change on the "Just Too Damn Real," where it suddenly goes to the flat 3 chord out of nowhere and sort of resolves to the second minor chord in the 2nd degree. Yeah,
we've talked about the strings quite a lot, but I think this is yet again another track where the strings do an amazing job. And I particularly love kind of the interaction with the lyrics. You know, the part about "I'll take a ride on your violin strung out on your bow," and the strings kind of react to being mentioned in the lyrics. That's kind of cute. And also the way the strings sound, I have no idea what the proper terminology for what they're doing is, but what they're playing on the "one duck on your wall" part is really, really nice sounding.
Is it just the pizzicato?
They're kind of being plucked, sort of like little staccato plucking.
Yeah, pizzicato. I think, I'm not sure if it mattered a lot, but it kind of would have. It's not just Deep Armor brilliantly arranging strings. I think part of that is that the string quartet that played on this album have been the players who had already toured with Tull on the War Child tour. With one violin player was replaced. I don't recall the names off the top of my head, sadly, which I probably should.
Yeah, there's a little story in the booklet about how they initially had hired a local orchestra in Monaco to do the strings, but it apparently didn't work out. So they got the string players in the UK to do them. Yeah, and
these string players were familiar to them, and Tull were familiar to them, and they kind of had a good time. The players were Elizabeth Edwards, Rita Eddowes, and Bridget Proctor. And Bridget Proctor was the one who was new. They played violins, and the cello was played by Catherine Thalborn. So I think part of why the strings work so well on this one is just the musicianship and the way that these players really understood what Jethro Tull were about.
Mm-hmm. This is another song that the lyrics feel like they might be kind of divorce-inspired somewhat, and that it feels like the first half of the song is very much kind of a description of like an ideal type of loving relationship type thing, but it's also about being alone. Mm-hmm. And then when we get into the second part of the lyrics, this is kind of the nothing at all part. Mm-hmm. It's much more kind of confrontational and sardonic to a relationship partner, which to me would not be surprising coming from kind of a state of divorce and that kind of thing.
Mm-hmm. It's interesting how it reflects musically, because apart from that sudden flat 3 chord change that I talked about, the first part is in very straightforward major key, and the second part is in major but what is called Mixolydian mode, which is a major that has a flat 7th, which gives it kind of a bluesy feel and kind of a slightly more dissonant, slightly edgier kind of sound.
Yeah,
and it works very, very well with the lyrics and with the kind of message.
And again, for me, because of the title, I never put together that these were supposed to be 2 distinct, different sections. I just thought it was one song until I sort of realized the slash.
Well, yeah, and the chorus in the first song that's conspicuously missing from the second one.
Yeah.
Kind of hints at that.
I like the ending because I like 2 things about the ending. I like, number 1, the confusion, which I always thought was kind of funny, with the whole dine on your sweet Sunday lunch confusion, and then the song just kind of stops, which I always thought that was weird and funny.
In a confusing way,
Yeah.
Appropriately.
And then the very end, it took me a long time to hear this, but the So There ending at the very end, it's quite quiet, but it took me a long time to hear that.
I don't think I've heard it until now.
Oh, really? Yeah, I guess if any listeners haven't heard it, if you crank up the volume at the very end of the song, he after the guitar is over, he kind of quietly says, "So there." That's the end of the song.
Mm-hmm. I think on this side of the album, because One White Duck is what begins the side 2 of the record. We've changed setting. We are not in the performance room anymore. We are not in front of the Lord and Lady. We are in the studio. Because in Baker Street Muse specifically, it's kind of obvious where they do a false start.
Yeah, that's interesting.
And so there might be another one of like a remark of a person who's just finished recording a song. Yeah. I don't think it's a performer saying to his audience, "So there."
Yeah, that's what I was saying earlier, is that there's on a lot of tracks on this album, like most of them, there's a lot of kind of behind the scenes before and after, cuts of recording and that kind of thing, which I don't think is anything important, but it's just interesting to me how most all of the tracks on here have that kind of thing going on.
Yeah, a lot of them are kind of tongue-in-cheek, especially on Baker Street Muse.
I like also, this is just kind of a personal thing for me, but I like in the Nothing at All part how there's sort of a little stanza about being a waiter on skates who's up to his deaf ears and cold breakfast trays to be cleared and that kind of thing. Just because my first job when I was 15, 16, I worked as a busboy at a deli, and that was my job, was to clear trays all day. And so I always could kind of relate to that in an abstract way, so that was just always kind of fun for me.
That's interesting. Did you think about this song when doing that job?
Yeah, because I mean, I would walk to work because I lived quite close, and I would listen to this song sometimes and think about it.
That's nice. Track 6, Baker Street Muse.
When the bus stop click shop window here, shady gentlemen fly.
Well, as I previously talked, a lot of this album, it feels like there are acoustic singer-songwriter ideas, that you called them singer-songwriter, by Ian, with the band coming in when the acoustic ideas on their own start to feel sort of boring. And this is the way that the entire album kind of feels to me. And I know there's been a view of this album as sort of a half solo album, and I wouldn't go that far to call it that, because it's very much a band album. But there's, if you look at the songs closely, there's really a lot of things that begin with just Ian and an acoustic guitar.
Yeah.
And then everyone else joining gradually. And Baker Street Muse is no exception to that, because it's a string of little songs joined together, and pretty much every one of them begins by Ian just setting it alone.
Yeah. I kind of view Baker Street Muse as kind of, it's like a mini Thick as a Brick Passion Play, whatever you want to call it. But you're right that it's different in that it's a lot more centered around Ian and sort of the singer-songwriter side. But to me, it's always kind of stuck out to me as it's like the last long Tull piece in that same vein. So you kind of have, I don't see them as a trilogy necessarily because I don't think they're related, but still having Thick as a Brick, Passion Play, and then to a smaller degree, Baker Street Muse. Those are kind of like the three long masterpiece songs of, the Tull discography to me.
It's interesting. I think of it slightly differently. I do agree that this is kind of the last long-form progressive rock track by Tull, but it reminds me of something different, and I'll talk about it in the end, because it's kind of funny. Also, there's an interesting article on the web. The article is devoted not to Jethro Tull, but to Pink Floyd's song Dogs. But there's a diagram comparing the structure of various long-form progressive rock songs, such as Dogs, Close to the Edge by Yes, and Tarkus by Emerson, Lake and Palmer, and Baker Street Muse by Jethro Tull. And the author, interestingly, that the author of that article argues that while pieces like Close to the Edge and Tarkus are multi-movement pieces, Baker Street Muse and Dogs are single movement pieces, because they are all in related keys and in a very similar time signature. I'm not sure what to make of that, because I kind of disagree. It still feels to me like basically 5 distinct songs, but we're carried through them by means of the arrangement. How does it feel to you? Does it feel to you that this 5-song suite is one cohesive piece, or is it slightly more disjointed? And I'm not using this word in a derogatory way.
Well, I think it's section based, as we can see from the track listing actually provided on the back of the original vinyl. And this was again an example where in the Steve Wilson mix they cut it into separate tracks, which I'm again unhappy about. But yeah, I mean, I think it's more cohesive than, say, a Passion Play, which is very clearly different, distinct parts. And this is somewhat more cohesive in that respect. But I mean, again, I think it's just different sections stitched together, but it's more cohesive than maybe other parts of the Tull discography that do the same thing.
That's interesting.
I think tonally the song is very straightforward. Like the tone doesn't change a lot, I think. Whereas, say, on Passion Play, the tone changes quite a lot. Like, there's a lot of roller coaster ups and downs.
Roller coaster, probably. It probably isn't roller coaster, but still, kind of to me, every piece, every section of it feels a little different. And if every section of it was longer, it could have been a song of its own.
Yeah. I think this first part, one of the things that I get the most out of it is the placemaking. Again, where I feel like there's a very clear picture of a city being painted here, and sort of a deserted city at night specifically. That's what I've always kind of seen in this opening part. I like that the texture, the musical texture in this song, it changes from the previous couple of songs, and we've got the piano coming in back from Black Satin Dancer, because there's really not a lot of piano on this album. Yeah, I like how the strings kind of get higher and higher every time on the chorus. The Didn't Take Her, I'm Just a Baker Street Muse part.
Yeah, the string arrangement on this part in particular kind of reminds me of the strings on Too Old to Rock and Roll.
Oh, yeah.
Which makes sense.
That's interesting.
Because it's just what they've been developing, the kind of arrangement.
I'll just say on this, I think there's great instrumental pieces towards the end when it gets into kind of the more, rocky part. Great drums again, lots of really good examples of those hi-hat opens that you also see on Black Satin Dancer. Those kind of come back. But I think it's a good intro. I think it paints a really good picture of, the narrator here, who is the Baker Street Muse, kind of strolling, wandering around in the street at night, I guess, on Baker Street. So the next section being Pygmy and the Whore.
Big bottle for all I can, put your weight on me, and set the pygmy to the horn, desperate for more.
the one that gave our podcast a name.
Yeah. Thankfully, it's not Pygmy and the Whore. That'd be a pretty terrible podcast name.
So the whole sort of place setting and thematic of Baker Street Muse is a little bit related, in my mind, to the first side of Aqualung, where it's street scenes and characters that the author sees while walking down a piece of a city, and there's not much else to it. It's like little pictures of various characters.
Yeah, I agree that it's a similar kind of thing, especially with this song, where it's because the narrator himself is kind of a natural peeping Tom, just in the sense of being someone wandering around a city street and that kind of thing.
I have more things to say about specifically Pygmy and the Whore, but I will save them until after we've discussed the last bit of the album, because I kind of want to finish with that.
I don't have a lot to say on this part specifically, but there's a couple lyrics that I like a lot. Like, it's kind of a weird one, but Big Bottled Fraulein, Put Your Weight on Me. I like that one. I think the whole writing out Pygmy as Pig-me is kind of clever. It's it's a little odd, but I kind of like that. It's
what it harkens back to in my mind. Saw his face in everyone, the line from the first song. So the observer here in Baker Street Muse sees himself in the Pygmy, and that's why it's that side of himself that he's referring to in that character.
Yeah, I think the same thing.
Threw away his looking glass, saw his face in everyone.
And I also love the line with Vernacular Verbose, an attempt at getting close to where he came from, in the doorway of the stars between Blandford Street and Mars. I like that one a lot.
Yeah, lots of, thinly veiled innuendo in this.
But the only other thing I can really say about it is I like the transition a lot, how they transition into the next piece, where it sort of very suddenly relaxes and calms down, where he goes into the, and as my rudder slowly turns me into Marleybone Road.
Yeah, it works really well. It is very cohesively stitched together. Next part, nice little tune. Kind of difficult to say anything about it, but again, it's a very nice change of texture.
Yeah. I also don't have a lot specifically on this one, but I've always appreciated this one a lot. I thought it was it's something that Jethro Tull does very well, this kind of music. And it reminds me a lot of kind of, you curl your toes in fun from Thick as a Brick and that kind of thing.
It's just glockenspiel.
Yeah, mostly. So it strikes me as that same kind of vibe, which I think the band is very good at writing. It also reminds me of a little bit of 1008 to Paddington on Passion Play. It's very much in that same kind of headspace, and I think they do a really good job of writing these sort of cute, sweet little tunes as sort of transitionatory pieces.
Yeah, kind of Celtic music influenced. Would compare it as well to, I don't know, Warm Sporen of Stormwood.
Yeah, that's interesting. I haven't thought about that.
Yeah, because that kind of Scottish music is obviously what comes very naturally to them, to Ian or to all of them as writers.
There's some chords that they sound quite jazzy to me in a way, which I like the way that sounds, the way the piano and the strings and guitar and everything come together on those. And the strings kind of overtake everything as you get closer and closer to the end of this section.
Yeah, again, so it's not doing the same thing, even in the space of a minute. This little track develops in sound and texture and content. Yeah,
and again, I'd encourage everybody to listen to Barry's playing on this, because I love the way he uses the hi-hat here. As kind of as at the end, as the strings are getting louder and louder, he's playing the kind of the ch on the hi-hat, which sounds really cool to me. Next section, Crash Barrier Waltzer.
Dragging one foot in the gutter. In the midnight.
I'm a huge fan of this part. This is one of my favorite parts on the album, and it's one of the most emotional Tull songs in my mind.
Yeah, it's so melancholy.
Yeah, it really hits hard, and I think the strings do a great job. Like, the strings do a lot of the heavy lifting on that, especially on the line, I'll pay the bill and make her well, when the string just like it rises in, and it really almost like, almost brings a tear to your eye. It's so powerful.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and the lyrics are sort of a little more straightforward than the previous two parts of the suite.
Mm-hmm.
But that's what kind of makes it hit harder.
Again, great lyrics. There's a lot I love here.
Mm-hmm.
There's kind of the very romantic, kind of Shakespearean view of things like, here slip I dragging one foot in the gutter, and the midnight echo of the shop that sells cheap radios. I like the whole thing about the policeman, where, Mr. Policeman, blue shirt, ballet master.
Yeah, and the exchange between the main character and the policeman.
Yeah.
He doesn't believe that the main character, doesn't believe, and also doesn't believe that the main character should care about that person who they're dealing with.
Yeah, I've always loved that. I'll pay the bill and make her well, like hell you bloody will, no do-good overkill.
The last line, like, we must teach them to be still more independent, is like directly lifted out of a newspaper with some kind of Tory politician.
Yeah, I always wondered about that line.
Talking about it.
Because it always sounded a bit out of place. And I also kind of always saw it as a political sentence. I'm not really sure why. I think just because the word independent is in there. But
it does sound political, and I don't think it's the point of view of the character. It's clearly the point of view of the policeman, and the point of view that is not really kind of his opinion, but something that he read in a newspaper and is just repeating.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, somehow I've always had the same thought, but I'm not really sure where that comes from. It's just the way it sounds, sort of.
Kind of a Tory view on social policies.
Mm-hmm. And I like the lyric, no drunken bums allowed to sleep here in the crowded emptiness. The way he sings that is really great.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, the crowded emptiness. Like, it's there, that there's a lot of space to sleep, but you're not allowed there. Mm-hmm. Because apparently it's required for something else. Nobody knows what. The
ending of this section is quite interesting. Where there's kind of a bunch of jazzy reverb guitar, and then kind of the motor car noise, like the old style motor car.
Yeah, kind of a sudden psychedelic soundscape.
Yeah. And it always made me think of an old movie. And I'm not really sure why, but there's that sound. Maybe it might be because it almost kind of sounds like a film projector or something, but I don't think that's what it's supposed to be. But it sounds like it's an old style, like motor car.
Yeah, I think the motor car that creates that effect, because musically it doesn't sound at all like anything from an old movie. Mm-hmm. We've just had a brilliant comment on one of our previous episodes on YouTube to Thick as a Brick by Ville Toivonen, who is apparently Finnish. And they say that this part of Crash Burial Waltzer reminds them a lot of Quote from Thick as a Brick. The part on side 2 with a lot of disjointed phrases and odd sounds. God is an overwhelming responsibility part, and I do see the similarity between these sections. Mm-hmm. And the last part of Baker Street Muse, Mother England Reverie.
I have no time for Time magazine or rolling.
We've discussed a little of that in our episode on War Child, and I would like to go back to that. There's an observation I found on Genius.com made by user Priest and Pimp, who found a hidden quote, a hidden reference to the poem Casabianca by Felicia Dorothy Hemans. We've talked about it a little previously in our War Child episode, and I would like to get back to that. I found a very interesting observation on the lyrics website, genius.com. The observation made by user Priest and Pimp, who found in the song Sea Lion a reference to the poem Casabianca written by Felicia Dorothy Hemans, which is the kind of one of the poems that English pupils were required to read and memorize. And the line in this poem begins by the lines, "The boy stood on the burning deck, whence all but he had fled." And I think in this specific song, Mother England Reverie, we've got another reference to that. There was a little boy stood on a burning log, and in this specific case, I really like that parallel, because in that poem, this boy standing on the burning deck is a picture of stoicism. And here, it's clearly Schadenfreude, rubbing his hands with glee. And I like how the reference to that character transforms in Ian's lyrics.
Yeah, I remember just talking about that, and it's interesting for me. I had no idea that was a pre-established, thing, the whole burning log, boy in the log thing. That's one of my favorite parts of Baker Street Muse, is that part specifically. I don't really care that much for sort of the beginning section of this Mother England Reverie section with the Time magazine and Rolling Stone and all that kind of thing.
Oh, I've always loved that part. I learned to play it on the guitar. It's got that brilliant slide.
Yeah. And there's a cannon sound at one point during that part, which I think is interesting.
Yeah, the 100 boom grand.
Yeah, but I like a lot how the band joins in on that acoustic guitar part. The little do-do-do-do-do-do. It sounds really good when they join in.
Yes, on the I Have No House in the Country. And how Barry comes in on just one phrase, the one-line joker.
Yeah, the do-do-do-do. Yeah. Yeah, I should do a drum cover of this Baker Street Muse. I just thought of that. I should do that sometime.
Yeah, there would be a lot of sitting still just.
Yeah, it would.
Because it's not a lot of drums percentage-wise. I like how the piano in this part is used, because it comes in a passage like we've been hearing mostly organ in the kind of heavier parts, but this is the one where we've got piano slamming down, and then when we go to the Baker Street Muse reprise section, we go back to the organ.
Yeah, I had never thought about that before. I thought about the line, I have no house in the country, in the beginning section. Just, regardless of whatever character Ian Anderson is playing here, I just thought it was a little ironic, because Ian Anderson actually would very soon have an actual house in the country. I don't remember if he bought it in 75 or 76, but he bought a country estate very soon after this album came out, which was kind of the inspiration piece for Songs from the Wood and that kind of thing.
Yeah, that's true. And the motor car, which is, I think Ian was mostly riding around on a motorcycle in Monaco.
Yeah.
And I think it was John and who else? I think there were John and Martin. I think they had motor cars.
Yeah. Because Ian has never had a driver's license in his life, from what I know.
Really?
Yeah, I love the lyrics on the burning log part. And especially, of course, when the album's title kind of comes in, where, someday I'll be a minstrel in the gallery, paint you a picture of the queen. I always loved that line. Just kind of the forward-looking optimism of it is kind of inspiring in a way.
Yeah, it kind of creates an interesting connection, because whether you look at it as being in the past for this character who then becomes the minstrel and performs to us the beginning of the album, or it's a different character who will then become a minstrel, like the character we've heard at the start of the album.
Yeah, who knows?
I like how non-linear it is. So he's been introduced to us as a minstrel, but then he's singing that one day he will.
Right, yeah. Also the line, when all's said and all's done, couldn't wish for a better one, which I like. There's a magnificent fill there, drum fill from Barry Barlow, which I like a lot.
Yeah, I always notice that line because of that. It's so tastily syncopated.
And the only other thing I have to talk about really on Baker Street Muse is just the ending.
Yeah, the kitchen sink.
With getting stuck in the booth. So
that one.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's interesting because the entire band has just finished playing, and then we're kind of left with a single person who's finished recording and is stuck. But where are all the other people? Are they in his imagination? What is really happening there? I mean, it's just sort of a tongue-in-cheek detail, I believe. But still, we could play with that and create an interpretation of what is actually happening there.
I guess I should mention at the end, too, I think it's clever the way they transition back to the beginning of the piece again. Back to the windy bus stop click shop window. That's nice. Yeah,
it creates the kind of circular development, ties things together. And the kind of a kitchen sink chaotic jam ending.
Yeah.
They really haven't done that a lot in the past few albums. When have you last heard one like that? Aqualung?
Yeah, back then. But it's again, the ending is again kind of odd to me. Just just with the whole joke of getting stuck in the booth and that kind of thing. It just always struck me as kind of out of place. I don't know. I mean,
it doesn't really, because we've been having a lot of we've had the false start of the whole Baker Street Muse suite.
Yeah.
Or the shit take one, take two, and we are supposed to imagine people playing that in the studio.
Because in the context of Baker Street Muse, I always thought it was kind of odd. It kind of struck me as kind of random, and I don't really feel one way or the other about it. I think part of it is because the false start, I think, is a genuine outtake they kept in. But I think the ending is very clearly a joke they did on purpose.
Well, yeah, it's very clearly not a recording of Ian actually being stuck anywhere. So
track 7, Grace, final track.
Hello, sun. Hello, bird.
So there's, of course, not a ton we can say about this one, given the length, but I love this song, even if I think it's a little cheesy, but I still think it's a really good song.
Yeah, it's a very nice one. Again, like Requiem, it ends unresolved. It ends on a 5 chord, but the melody ends on a 5, but the strings go to the 3rd degree again, and we're completely up in the air in the very last second.
Yeah, I love that final little string line kind of going on as the album fades out. I think it's great ending, and it's very much, this is a thankful song. That's kind of what I like about it. It's a great, gracious, grateful song.
I have something to say about this song, and what I thought about yesterday, as a matter of fact, that the whole Baker Street Muse suite, what it actually reminded me of was the Abbey Road medley by the Beatles, because you've got the string of different short songs, various characters being introduced, and then a small acoustic kind of sweet song tacked onto the end. So Grace is Her Majesty in relation to Baker Street Muse
that's funny.
being the Abbey Road medley. And then I thought some more about that, and I thought to myself, doesn't Pick Me and the Whore remind me of Polythene Pam? And I realized that it does very much, because at first I thought it was just the tu-du-du-dum motif, which you have in both songs.
Yeah.
And then I thought, I will look at the chords. Surely they are completely different. I couldn't have been more wrong, because the basic chord melody in that is a 7, a 4, and a 1 chord looped together. Just a tam 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 ta da da dum. Vernacular verbose ta da da dum. Well, you can see Polythene Pam ta da da dum. This kind of rhythmic motif, the ta da da dum, it happens on different beats, and it's not. I'm not saying it is plagiarism, of course. Nothing about it is similar besides that, and chord progressions aren't something you can rip off. But it's funny to look at it that way, and I'm not offering this as any kind of definitive critical analysis, but this is a game, right? Like the glass bead game, as described by Hermann Hesse. You take pieces of art, you put them together, and you look how they play against each other. The kind of postmodern approach to art that I enjoy very much, not the postmodern philosophy as applied to real life, which I don't feel is very useful and very kind. But the postmodern approach to art is, I think, a game I really enjoy, and just putting together the Abbey Road medley and Baker Street Muse and finding the completely unexpected similarities there, it brings me great joy.
Yeah, that's really funny. I had never made that connection at all. I think the way it would be even more perfect would be if Grace was an outtake that was taken out of one of the existing parts of the sections or something, like Her Majesty.
I think Her Majesty was just Paul McCartney came into the Abbey Road studio himself and recorded that after everything was done. This is a kind of an exercise in form, if you will, right? A string of songs with little acoustic number at the end.
The only final thing I have to say while we're in the track list section, sort of, is My dad had a cassette of this album, and we listened to that cassette a lot. And I think of all the Tull albums, this is probably one of the albums that I've listened to the most in my life. And I remember very distinctly that on that cassette, there was a section which I think was after Grace, but it could have been somewhere else. But there was kind of like a synth tone, like a sine wave, that went on for a couple of seconds. And I remember hearing this many different times as we listened to this cassette. And I remember asking my dad at one point, what is that? Like, what is that supposed to be? And he said, I think the band just put that there or something like that. And I don't know I don't think this was actually part of the album because, I've never heard it anywhere else on any other part of the album. So my guess is that it was just some kind of technology on the cassette that lets you know when the cassette is finished or when it's being flipped over or something. But when I think of this album, I still think of that random little synth sine wave noise that for years I thought was an actual part of this album. But it wasn't until I had the actual CD releases later that I saw that it wasn't actually on the album.
Yeah, it's interesting how the way we listened to albums colors sort of our experience.
Yeah.
Because I have a kind of a similar experience with Abbey Road that we've just talked about, because it doesn't fit on the 45-minute side of a 90-minute tape. So it's cut out in the beginning of the drum solo on the end.
That's sad.
And yeah, I didn't hear Her Majesty until sometime later.
That sine wave always stuck out to me just because it was an extremely science fiction sounding sound, and it stuck out a lot on an album which is a lot more sort of Elizabethan or something like Minstrel in the Gallery.
Yeah, it's interesting. What could it have been just an artifact of copying? Was it a kind of a licensed cassette?
Yeah, it was an official cassette. But my guess is it was just some kind of audio signal that the cassette was being flipped over or ending or something.
Yeah, I wonder what that was. My cassette with the Minstrel in the Gallery had Songs from the Wood on the other side.
Oh, nice.
So I always listened to these two albums kind of coupled.
So this for me, as I think I said previously, this is in my top 5 of Tull albums. I think it's a magnificent album. And as I just mentioned, like of all of the albums in the discography, I may have listened to this one the most in my lifetime, just as if you could look at, a theoretical chart of hours clocked listening to albums or something.
Yeah. I completely agree. One of my top Tull albums as well.
So I want to ask you if you have sort of specific tracks you can highlight as top moments and bottom moments, if you can, for an album like this.
Yeah, it's gonna be difficult because, again, one of my favorite albums, and Cold Winter Valhalla is one of my favorite songs, and I really like Baker Street. I can't not say that Baker Street Muse is one of my favorite songs as well, and with as few songs as there are on this album, it's kind of difficult to say this is my favorite and this isn't. Like, I love Requiem, I love Black Satin Dancer. Maybe the least favorite part, for the very reasons that we've discussed, is actually the title track, because it could have had more lyrics.
Yeah, I agree.
Right, the kind of reusing the lyrics in the heavier part kind of always rubs me the wrong way a little bit, even though it is an interesting experiment to create two completely different songs from the same set of lyrics. So yeah, that's probably my one slightly bottom track.
Yeah, I feel quite similarly. I think if I had to pick my top 3 of songs from this album, I would say One White Duck, Cold Wind of Valhalla, and Baker Street Muse. I think those are my 3 favorites. And I really don't have any part of this album I dislike or that I think is, a bottom or anything. But if you forced me to choose, I would say I would probably single out Black Satin Dancer as the track that I listen to the least from this album. But again, I like every song on here. I think everything is good. And then Minstrel in the Gallery for kind of the title track for the same reason that you said, where I think it's a really good song and I think it has some great instrumental parts. I think the main electric guitar riff is like one of the best Martin Barr riffs ever. But just something about the interplay between the first and second halves has just always not really sat that well with me.
Yeah, the Martin Barr's riff actually is a good argument against calling this a solo album, because this is entirely Martin's composition, as far as I understand.
And I think it sounds really good live, that electric second half.
Yeah, obviously.
But it's very interesting that the tone of this album was not really continued. So in a lot of ways, it strikes me as kind of very much a one-off album, both in the sense that, it was Jeffrey's last album, and that the next album, Too Old to Rock and Roll, even though it was recorded at the same space in Monaco, it's very different. Tonally, musically, just so much about it is very different. And so it's very interesting how that developed and how it sort of left Minstrel feeling as kind of a one-off to me in the discography.
Yeah, that's true. But you can also say that Too Old to Rock and Roll is a one-off.
Yeah, absolutely.
In the discography. So there's a lot of these experiments in the Tull discography that only last one album. Because I think, this string of albums between Passion Play and Songs from the Wood, the three of them are very different. War Child is very different from both of the subsequent albums, and you can say the same about each one of them.
I actually feel that musically War Child and Minstrel in the Gallery are kind of connected. Just the difference is that the tone and the theme is very different, kind of the tonal approach to it. But musically they feel quite similar to me in a lot of ways.
Well, maybe it's hard to tell because War Child is such a woodwind and keyboard heavy heavy album,
true.
And Minstrel is such a guitar based, both with acoustic guitar and electric guitar.
Yeah, the next album is certainly very different though, and I'm actually quite excited to talk about it.
Yeah, I know not many people like it a lot,
but it strikes me as an album that's it's very under discussed in the discography, one of the most under discussed, I think, and so that'll be something for us to look forward to in 2 weeks' time.
That's true.
So until then, thank you everybody for listening as always. I hope you're enjoying going through these albums, classic albums for us, I'm sure for you as well. And we'll see you all in 2 weeks with Too Old to Rock and Roll.
See you next time. Cheers.